There are restaurants in this country where money alone cannot buy you a seat. Maison Aurélie, tucked into a limestone building on Wellington Street West in Ottawa, was one of them. The waiting list ran 8 months on a good year. The deposit, non-refundable, naturally, was steep enough that people who could technically afford it chose not to bother. What the money bought was not a table. It bought the right to be considered. The chef, a quiet Acadian man named Sébastien Godin, had turned down a Toronto developer once, politely and without explanation, simply because the man had been rude to the woman who answered the phone. The staff knew this. It shaped the way they worked. Amélie Tran had been at Maison Aurélie for 3 years, which in that dining room constituted something close to institutional memory. She was 28, with the particular stillness that comes not from ease, but from discipline. The kind of person who had learned, early and by necessity, to hold a great deal inside a very small space. Her colleagues liked her. The regulars requested her section. The chef, who spoke to servers only when required, had once stopped beside her mid-service to say that she had good instincts. She had thanked him and returned to her tables, and had not told anyone, because it was not the kind of place where you announced things like that. What most of them did not know, what she had never offered and no one had thought to ask, was that she had spent 2 years at the University of Toronto, in the Faculty of Medicine, before transferring to McGill for a degree in biochemistry, that she had finished in 3 years instead of 4. She had been accepted to the doctoral program. She had deferred once, then again, and then she had quietly let the offer expire and found work that paid weekly and did not require her to be anywhere other than where her mother needed her. Her mother, Lynn, had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's at 53. The disease moved slowly, and then it did not. The apartment they shared in Gatineau cost money. The specialist cost more. The medications were covered by provincial insurance only partially, and the gaps between partial coverage and actual cost were places where things fell through. Amélie had learned to be precise about money in the way that people who have very little of it are always precise. Not anxious, just exact. She knew what things cost. She budgeted in a way that would have impressed the kind of MBA students who read books about frugality, from the comfort of condos their parents had helped purchase. She had not told the restaurant this either. It was not relevant to the work. On a Tuesday evening in late November, the dining room was at full capacity. Outside, the first real cold of the season had arrived. Not the preliminary cold of October that people still dressed optimistically for, but the settled, resigned cold that meant coats and the particular sound of boots on frozen pavement. Inside, the candles on each table threw soft shadows across the white linens, and the room had the particular hum of people who were spending a great deal of money and knew it and found this, on the whole, satisfying. Amélie was managing 6 tables. 3 were mid-service. 1 was dessert and coffee. 1 was a couple celebrating something. An anniversary, she guessed, from the way the woman kept glancing at a small wrapped box on the seat beside her. The 6th table, the large round one near the east window that the restaurant reserved for parties of consequence, had been booked 3 weeks in advance under the name Bertrand Lacroix. She knew the name. Ottawa knew the name. Bertrand Lacroix was 44, founder and chief executive of a technology company called North Axis that had made him, depending on which profile you read, somewhere between 400 million and just over $1 billion. He had started the company in a Kanata basement, a fact he mentioned in every interview he gave because it was the kind of detail that made people feel good about money, that it could be made by anyone, even someone who started in a basement, which was technically true and contextually misleading in the way that most such stories were. He was not from Ottawa originally. He was from Chicoutimi. He had moved to the capital because that was where the federal contracts were, and North Axis's early success had been almost entirely dependent on federal contracts, a fact that also did not appear prominently in the profiles. He arrived at 7:15, which was 15 minutes late, with 4 other men who all had the look of people who worked for him. Not employees exactly, but the particular satellites that orbit men like Lacroix, people who laugh at the right moments and agree at a frequency that is both impressive and faintly nauseating. They were loud coming through the door. Not aggressively loud, just accustomed to being heard, which produced the same effect. Amélie was at the service station when they were seated. She finished what she was doing and crossed the room. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Maison Aurélie. My name is Amélie. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I bring some still or sparkling water while you look over the menu?" Lacroix looked up at her. He had the kind of face that photographed well, jaw forward, eyes direct, the practiced ease of someone who had been told he was compelling enough times that he had begun to move through rooms accordingly. He held the menu without opening it. "Sparkling," he said, "and we'll need a moment." He said it in the tone of someone dismissing a toll booth operator. She brought the water. She gave them their moment. When she returned, Lacroix was talking. He was in the middle of a story about a flight he had taken from Vancouver, something about delay that had cost him a meeting, and it was clear from the posture of the 4 men around him that this was a story they had perhaps heard before. Or if not this story, then many stories very much like it, and that the correct response was interested attention. One of them, the youngest, wearing a jacket that was slightly too large, was nodding in a way that seemed involuntary. Amélie waited. Lacroix finished his story. He looked at her as though she had just appeared. "You need something?" he said. "Whenever you're ready to order," she said. "No rush." He studied the menu for a moment, then set it down. "I want to ask you something first," he said. He had the voice of a man who considered asking questions a form of generosity. "This foie gras terrine. Where is the duck sourced?" "Quebec," she said. "A small farm near Saint-Hyacinthe. The chef has worked with them for about 6 years. They're one of the few operations in the province with Saint-Hyacinthe." He repeated the name as though she had said something slightly wrong. "That's not traditional foie gras country." "No," she agreed, "though the quality has been consistent. The terrine is one of the—" "I didn't ask for a sales pitch." He smiled when he said it, to indicate that this was a joke, though the smile did not reach the register of something that was actually joking. The man with the too large jacket made a sound that might have been a laugh. Amélie did not change her expression. She had been doing this for 3 years, and she had a mother to get home to, and she had learned, a long time ago, that the distance between where she was and where she intended to be was not a thing that could be shortened by reacting to Bertrand Lacroix. "Take all the time you need," she said. Pleasantly, he ordered. The others ordered. The appetizers arrived. Amélie confirmed everything correctly, and without consultation, having memorized the modifications, one without the shallot reduction, one with the dressing on the side, without being asked to write them down. This was not a performance. She simply did not write things down if she could remember them, because it was faster and cleaner, and the guests found it either reassuring or impressive, both of which were useful. The trouble began with the main course. She had brought the first plate, the duck confit, for Lacroix himself, and was setting it before him when he spoke. Not loudly. In fact, he lowered his voice slightly, which was somehow worse, because it meant he was directing it at her specifically. He said something in French. This was not unusual. Ottawa was bilingual. The restaurant was bilingual. She was bilingual. But what he said was not in the French she spoke. The sounds were French adjacent. Some of the rhythms were similar, a few of the phonemes overlapped, but the structure was different. The roots were different. The whole grammatical logic of it was different. It took her a half-second to place it, and when she did, she felt something go very quiet inside her. He was speaking Basque. Not well. She could hear the roughness of a non-native speaker, the slight hesitation before less common constructions, but well enough. Well enough to know what he was doing. He had said, as far as she could pass it, "I wonder if the girl knows what country she's in." The four men around him did not understand Basque, but they understood the dynamic. The two nearest Lacroix were smiling in the slightly unfocused way of people who can tell a joke has been made and are laughing at the shape of it rather than the content. The youngest one was looking at his plate. Amélie set the duck confit down precisely, made sure the handle of the knife was correctly oriented and straightened up. She answered him in Basque. Her Basque was better than his, not dramatically so. She was not a native speaker either, but she had spent a summer in the Pays Basque at 21, 6 weeks in a village outside Bayonne as part of a research placement that had been, at the time, one of the better things that had ever happened to her. She had studied the language before she went, because she studied things before she went places, and she had continued after, because she was the kind of person who could not justify letting something go once she had picked it up. She said, in Basque, something that translated roughly as, "The service here is the same in every language, monsieur. I hope the duck is to your satisfaction." The table went completely silent. Lacroix's expression did not collapse. He was too controlled for that, but something in it shifted, a slight tightening around the eyes, a recalibration that he performed quickly and almost invisibly, except that she was standing directly in front of him and had become, over 3 years of watching people in expensive rooms, fairly good at reading the small adjustments people made when something had not gone as planned. He said, in English. "Where did you pick that up?" "Pays Basque," she said. "A few years ago." "Research?" She paused, just briefly. "A placement," she said. He looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of someone who has just revised their assessment of a situation and is deciding how to proceed. Then he picked up his fork. "Impressive," he said, in the tone of a man who grants compliments as a form of leverage. She thanked him and returned to her other tables. She thought it was over. That was her first miscalculation. The second time came 20 minutes later, while she was clearing the appetizer plates from the couple at table 3. She heard him before she turned. Not his voice, but the shift in register at his table, the slightly heightened quality that meant something was happening. When she glanced over, Lacroix was watching her. He had the expression of someone who had been thinking. She finished with table 3 and approached. "Everything all right with the main?" she asked. "Excellent," he said. "I have a question for you." He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands in the way that people do when they are about to say something they believe to be clever. "You went to university?" "I did," she said. "What did you study?" The room had a quality, sometimes, of going slightly still, not loudly, just a kind of held quality to the air. "Sciences," she said. He smiled. It was a different smile than before, less dismissive, more curious, but in a way that was still fundamentally about him. "Sciences, and you ended up here," she said again. "Any particular reason?" She looked at him steadily. "Circumstances change," she said. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" He held her gaze for a moment. "No," he said, "that'll be all." But it was not all, because Bertrand Lacroix was a man who, when something had surprised him, felt a strong compulsion to re-establish the terms. She could see it in him the way you can see weather coming. Not a specific storm, just the pressure change, the quality of the air before. The third time, he spoke to one of his colleagues while she was pouring wine. He was talking about his company, something about a European expansion, a partnership he was pursuing. He said something about Bilbao. And then, as though it were a tangential thought, a small conversational aside, he switched into Basque again. He said something that translated, loosely, as impressive for a girl who pours wine for a living. His colleague, the one directly to his right, a man in his 50s with a face like a closed door, laughed, short and quiet. Amélie finished pouring the wine. She set the bottle down. She looked at Lacroix, and she said, in Basque, calm as the surface of the Ottawa River in August, "The language is called Euskara, monsieur. The people who speak it natively would likely find your accent more interesting than mine." And then, in English, without changing her tone, "Shall I describe the dessert menu, or would you like a moment?" The table was very quiet. The colleague to his right was no longer laughing. Lacroix was looking at her with an expression that had moved past recalibration into something she had not seen on him before, something that was genuinely unscripted. One of the others, the youngest, the one who had been looking at his plate, let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Lacroix recovered. She had to give him that. "The dessert menu," he said evenly. "Please." She described it. She answered 2 questions about the tarte tatin. She thanked them and withdrew. In the kitchen, she leaned briefly against the cold wall beside the pass and let herself feel, for approximately 10 seconds, the thing she had been not feeling for the past 40 minutes. Not anger. Something more specific. A kind of tired clarity. The feeling of understanding exactly what is happening to you and exactly why it doesn't matter, and being slightly exhausted by the distance between those 2 things. Sébastien Godin was plating something at the pass. He did not look up. "You all right?" he said without turning. "Fine," she said. "Table 6 giving you trouble?" "Nothing unusual," she said. He looked up then, briefly. He was a quiet man, but he was not an inattentive one, and he had been watching his dining room for 15 years. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "You know who's sitting at the corner table tonight? The woman by herself. Came in at 7. Amélie glanced through the service window. The corner table was occupied by a woman she had clocked when she arrived. 50s, perhaps 60, alone, no phone on the table, a glass of Sancerre, reading nothing, the kind of person who occupied space very deliberately. "I've seen her," Amélie said. "She booked under Fairweather," Godin said. "Eleanor Fairweather." The name did not land immediately. And then it did. Eleanor Fairweather was the managing partner of Fairweather Okafor, one of the most prominent institutional investment firms in the country. She had built the firm's life sciences portfolio from 12 million to somewhere north of 300 million over 14 years. She had a reputation for being almost entirely unreadable, for sitting in meetings without speaking for long periods of time, and for making decisions that other people did not understand until several months later, when the logic became obvious. She had been profiled twice in the Globe and Mail, and once in a very long piece in Report on Business that Amélie had read actually years ago in a library, while her mother had an appointment. "She asked for you specifically," Godin said, "by name." Amélie looked at him. "She was here last month," he said. "You served her then. She requested you for tonight." He paused. "Go when you have a moment." She went, after she had delivered the dessert menus, to table 6, after Lacroix had ordered the crème brûlée and thanked her with the particular warmth of a man who has decided, having not quite won, to be magnanimous. She approached the corner table and introduced herself, though this felt slightly unnecessary, given that the woman had apparently requested her. Eleanor Fairweather looked up. She had the eyes of someone who had spent decades reading rooms and people and had long since stopped finding the process particularly interesting, which gave her a quality of watchful neutrality that was either reassuring or unsettling depending on your relationship to being accurately assessed. "Amélie," she said, "please sit down for a moment." This was not a thing that happened at Maison Aurélie. Servers did not sit with guests, but Fairweather said it with the quiet authority of someone who had decided it was going to happen, and there was something in her manner that made refusal feel not rude, but simply beside the point. Amélie sat. "I watched what happened at table 6 tonight," Fairweather said. "I watched all of it." Amélie said nothing. "I know Bertrand Lacroix," Fairweather said, "not personally, by reputation and by the particular type. A man who is genuinely impressive in some ways and uses those ways to justify the rest of it." She looked at Amélie in that flat, assessing way. "You handled it well." "Both times." "3 times," Amélie said, before she'd thought about it. A small, specific thing happened at the corners of Fairweather's mouth. Not quite a smile. "The 3 times," she agreed. "Where did you learn Basque? Research placement." "South of France." "I was 21. What kind of research?" "Biochemistry. Language acquisition in bilingual populations. Actually, we were looking at how Euskara speakers processed certain phonological." She stopped. "I'm sorry. That's probably more than you." "No," Fairweather said. She continued. She spoke for perhaps 3 minutes. About the placement, about the study, about the particular puzzle of Basque as a language isolate, unrelated to any other language family on Earth, which made it extraordinary for certain kinds of cognitive research. Fairweather listened in the way she listened to everything, completely and without interrupting. When Amélie finished, there was a short silence. "You didn't complete your degree," Fairweather said. It was not a question. "I completed it," Amélie said carefully. "I didn't continue to the doctorate." Why, the directness of it was not unkind. It was simply direct. "My mother's health," Amélie said. "It required my attention and it required money, and those 2 things together made the timeline impractical." Fairweather nodded slowly. "What was your doctoral research going to be?" "Neurodegeneration," Amélie said. "Specifically, early intervention markers in Parkinson's disease." She paused. "My mother has Parkinson's." The room did what it always did, held its ambient noise, its soft percussion of cutlery and conversation, and the specific sound of wine being poured into good glasses. Lacroix's table was laughing about something. The couple at table 3 had opened the small wrapped box, and the woman was holding whatever had been inside it in a way that suggested it was exactly what she had wanted. Fairweather looked at Amélie for a moment. "I'm building a research advisory council," she said. "For a portfolio company we took majority stake in this past spring. They're working on early intervention in neurodegenerative diseases, primarily Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. The science director is leaving for personal reasons, and we need someone who can bridge the research and investment sides. It's a significant step up from where you are." She said this without apology, because it was simply true, and she was not the kind of person who cushioned true things. It would also pay considerably more than this. Amélie was aware of her own breathing, in a way she was not usually aware of it. "You're offering me a position," she said. "I'm offering you a conversation," Fairweather said. "A proper one. Next week at our office on Spark Street. You'd come in, meet the team, see the work. If it makes sense, we'd talk further." She reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and set a card on the table. Plain card, dark ink, the kind of card that does not need to be impressive because the name on it does the work. If it doesn't, you'll have had a very good cup of coffee, and I'll have confirmed what I already suspect, which is that you're one of the more interesting people I've been in a room with in some time. Amélie looked at the card. She did not pick it up yet. "How did you know?" she said. "About the research background." Fairweather tilted her head slightly. "I didn't. Not until tonight. What I knew was that you were precise, calm under provocation, and that when Lacroix switched languages, your response was not surprise. It was recognition followed by a decision." She paused. "I've hired a great many people over the years. The thing I am most interested in is what someone does with the 2 seconds between something unexpected happening and their response to it. Most people fill those 2 seconds with noise. You didn't." Amélie looked at the card. She picked it up. "I'll be there," she said. She stood, tucked the card into the pocket of her server's apron, and returned to her tables. She cleared the dessert plates from table 6 without ceremony. Lacroix looked up when she brought the bill. "Excellent service tonight," he said. He said it in French, conventional French, the kind he presumably used without strategic intent. He was smiling with the warmth of a man who has decided, in the final accounting of the evening, that the situation had resolved in his favor. The evening had been good. The food had been excellent. He had displayed something of himself, and there had been a small unexpected moment. And then things had continued, and that was how the world generally worked. "Thank you," she said. "Have a good evening." She did not tell him what was in her apron pocket. She did not need to. The story that mattered would not be his to tell. She brought the last of the side plates back to the kitchen, checked on the couple at table 3. They were finishing their coffee, the woman still holding her gift, the man watching her with the expression to the expression of someone who is very glad to be exactly where they are, and began the quiet work of closing her section. Outside, the Ottawa cold had settled in for real now. Later, when she drove home across the bridge to Gatineau, she would see the river frozen at the edges, that particular shade of early winter that looked almost silver under the streetlights. Her mother would be asleep. She would sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and look at the business card and think about what it meant, carefully and without rushing, in the way she thought about everything that mattered. The card was small and plain, and heavier than it looked. So was she.